Installing a car stereo in today's day and age, it's a little bit different than the past. Many vehicles now have a data connection between the factory head unit and the vehicle that we need to maintain. Vehicles now have things like the steering wheel controls that we want to keep, as well as other things like the backup camera. Installing a new radio is no longer a matter of just snipping a few wires and reattaching them. So the question becomes, with all this new technology built into the factory head unit, can we upgrade it and is it worth it? I say yes. Thanks to the efforts of the car audio industry, we now have a lot of different integration pieces that allow us to retain these advanced features. And although the factory stereo might have a big, nice, shiny screen, there are still advantages of upgrading to something aftermarket, one of which being that we get nice, clean audio output signals that we can use with aftermarket amplifiers. These also have far more features and are oftentimes quicker to boot up and more responsive. So, how can we determine if we can upgrade our car stereo? And if we can, how can we keep steering wheel controls, backup cameras? And since it's no longer a matter of just connecting a power and ground wire, what advanced integration harnesses do we need that will talk to the data signal of the car? Well, my friends, I've got the video for you because today we are going to go very in-depth and answer those questions. Now, there's a disclaimer. I really wanted to make sure that I gave you guys a ton of information, so this video is on the longer side. So what I did to keep things organized is I added a bunch of timestamps to the different sections of the video down in the video description, and now on YouTube, you can also scroll through the timeline and you can see the different chapters of this video. Now, also note that the example I'm going to be using in this video is on this Volkswagen Jetta, since I'm currently doing a full build on this car, but the overall process and the different tips I'm going to give you guys apply to all vehicles. Unfortunately, there's not an integration solution for every new vehicle out there, so the first chapter of this video, we're going to cover how to determine if there is. My friends, I'm Mark. Welcome to Car Audio Fabrication. Let's get into this. So first things first, how do we pick a head unit and how do we know exactly what gear we're going to need to integrate it into our car? For this, my favorite website to use is Crutchfield. Now, Crutchfield was cool enough to sponsor this video, but I do want to let you guys know that I've used Crutchfield for many, many years, long before I actually even made the channel. They've been around for a long time, and they have very, very valuable information you're going to see here in a second. So we need to know exactly what fits our car. So we're going to go car, audio, and video, and we're going to find what fits our car, select your vehicle. Here I'm going to enter the year, make, and model. For this build, we're doing a 2017 Volkswagen Jetta. It's important to understand that not every vehicle model has the same exact car audio system. A lot of times from the factory, they come with factory premium systems. There's different trim level options, and those options can change what kind of radio you can use. It can change what kind of speakers you can use. So Crutchfield has done a ton of research. We can go ahead and pick our option here. In this case of this vehicle, we do not have the fender upgrade, so we're going to click no. So now we can see all of this research that Crutchfield's done, and this is super nice because you can really get an idea what you're getting yourself into as far as replacing the radio. We're going to focus more on replacing the radio obviously in this video, but I do want to mention that they also have a ton of research about factory speaker sizes and what can be upgraded there. So if we scroll on down, we're going to look through their hand-selected list of all the different car stereos that will fit the Jetta. Here we can narrow down what we're looking for. I know that I want a Sony head unit. I can limit the amount to, let's say, less than $760. I know that I want a double DIN head unit. I also know that I definitely want Android Auto, and I definitely want Apple CarPlay. Now, if I wanted to do a little bit more comparison here, I can just select multiple different options, and then I can see all of the details and compare all of these side by side. And I know in this case, I want to go with the Sony XAV-AX 5500. Now, this is what's super cool about Crutchfield. Again, we know that it fits, but we can also see the installation gear that we need. And in fact, they actually give us two different options. There's the most features options and the lowest prices option. Under each of these options, we can see the factory vehicle features that are retained. So it looks like the main difference between these two is with this one on the left here, I get to retain the steering wheel controls. We definitely want to do that. So that's the option we're going to go with. I do want to mention, because sometimes people get confused, see how Bluetooth is grayed out here? What that means is that you can no longer use the factory Bluetooth system. But since we're adding an aftermarket head unit that has Bluetooth built into it, obviously you can still connect to that Bluetooth. We're just losing the factory Bluetooth. Same for the satellite radio. You're not going to use the factory antenna anymore, but you could easily add an aftermarket antenna. We also keep the backup camera. That's super key, so let's go ahead and add that to cart. So that takes us to the cart, and now we have everything populated that we need. We've got the radio interface harness, the steering wheel control adapter, the fit kit, because obviously every different dash on each vehicle is different, so we've got that kit there to adapt the size of the radio. We've got an antenna adapter and all the screws that we need. You can also see with a qualifying purchase, they give us a nice savings on this install gear. Now additionally, here's where it gets even better yet. Crutchfield has what they call the master sheet. Unfortunately, not all of us are professional installers with years of experience on how to take apart each vehicle, but the master sheet actually makes it really easy, more of a step-by-step process. You guys are going to see more in detail what the master sheet looks like in a couple of minutes. I had a couple of other things I wanted to add to the cart here for this build, so I've got those added in. So now we can go through with our purchase, but before we do that, we definitely want to make sure that we take advantage of the special offer they have for car audio fabrication fans. You guys can learn more about that by checking out the link here on screen or down in the video description. We've got the order placed, now we play the waiting game for our package to arrive. Alright guys, the package here has arrived. Let's open it up and take a look. First of all, we've got the Crutchfield support manual here. You guys should know that Crutchfield does offer a ton of tech support, so if you do run into any issues while you're doing your install, you can call them up and they can help you out. And I will say a lot of their employees are ex-car audio installers, so they definitely have some experience with what this all takes. Looks like we've got the head unit right here. Some of those various installation goodies that I added on, one of the things was a USB port that I can plug into. I've got some speaker harness adapters, and it looks like there's also the antenna adapter in here. The wiring harness for adapting to the vehicle's wiring. Fit kit here that holds the stereo in the dash. The steering wheel control interface. And again, some more various install accessories that I'll be using elsewhere in the build. The other thing we get is that master sheet, and this is sent via email. This is a PDF document. I could of course print it out, but I like to just use it here on the iPad. It's easy to navigate, and you can see that this gives us a step-by-step procedure in order to remove the dash panel and actually remove the factory radio and add the aftermarket radio. It also gives us details for removing each of the different speaker locations within the vehicle. I also like that they have this little chart here that tells us what different tools we need for each of the different tasks. And what's really nice is since they send this via email, is you'll get it before you get the package. That way you can make sure that you have all the tools on hand ready to go. The main challenge here though is going to be connecting the wires for the different interface units to the wire harness on the head unit here so that we can plug it into the vehicle. And some of the master sheets also give you details as far as matching up the speaker wires, but you can also find all the connection information in the manuals of these devices along with the head unit. Now, an important note about these harnesses, many harnesses are no longer just a couple of plugs. This harness actually has a brain box as part of it in order to properly talk to and interpret the vehicle's data signals. Once you pull each of the harnesses and their set of instructions out of each of the respective packages, you're going to have something that looks like this. Now, I know it can be a little bit intimidating once you start reading through some of these directions, what you need to do, but I have a big suggestion for you here to help you out, and that is to start with reading the directions that are for the vehicle harness itself. We know that this is the exact harness that we need for our exact vehicle, so what that means is this is going to have the most information that pertains to our exact vehicle. Obviously, the head unit is going to be designed so that it can work in a variety of different vehicles, so the directions here are going to be more vague and they're only really going to apply to what this harness is. The same goes for the steering wheel control. This is a device that is designed to work in multiple different vehicles depending on the way that it's interfaced through this harness. So by focusing on the directions for the vehicle harness itself, you're going to save yourself a lot of headache. It's going to become a lot more clear what connections you actually need. If you've never done a radio install before, let me give you a quick rundown of what these wire colors are. These are pretty industry standard on these aftermarket harnesses. And by having a basic knowledge of what these are, you're going to be way ahead. So first of all, black wire, that is our ground wire, and that connects to the radio harness. Next up is the yellow wire, and that says it connects to the battery wire. What that means is that is a 12 volt constant lead, meaning this yellow wire, it's always going to have 12 volts at all times, regardless of if the vehicle is on or off. Next up, we have the red accessory wire, and what that means is that this is going to turn on and off with the vehicle, so whenever the vehicle wants the radio to turn on, it's going to activate 12 volts of power on that red lead, so that connects to the radio harness too. Next up, if the aftermarket radio has an illumination wire, connect the orange wire to it. So here's our orange wire that we would need to connect, and usually the illumination wire is also orange on the head unit, so let's double check right here. Yes, orange and white striped is illumination, so I would connect those as well. Next up, our instructions say to disregard the blue-white wire. It will not be used in this application. If you're wondering, the blue-white wire is usually an accessory turn-on, something that you would use to turn on the amplifiers, but we would be using that coming out of our head unit instead, which you can see right here. We have the remote out to turn on our amps, so we could connect that further down the line. Next, we have this big grouping of wire colors here that you can see. These all pertain to the 4 different speakers that we can power. So the gray wire is a positive wire that goes to the front right speaker, and the gray black is a negative wire going to the front right speaker, and so on. So all those speaker connections are super easy because you're just going to connect them to the outputs of our new head unit. It's going to be sending that musical signal into the vehicle, into our speakers. Now, as a quick side note, I'm going to be adding aftermarket amplifiers to this system, so I'm actually not going to connect these wires to the head unit. That's because I'm going to feed that musical signal out of the amplifiers into these wires to the speakers and use some of the factory vehicles wiring instead. So those first 13 wires there, you're going to see those on pretty much every install. Next, we have some additional wires that are a little bit more unique. One is the light green wire. That's just going to connect to our parking brake wire, which you can see that long version there. We have a blue pink wire. This is the vehicle speed sense, which if we look at the list of wires for our head unit, we don't have that, so we'll just be disregarding that. And then the last one here is the green purple, which is the reverse wire, which this does have. You can see reverse in. This will help the head unit know when it needs to be taking the video signal from the factory backup camera and displaying it. Now, what's nice about this harness is it actually gives us a plug right here. If you read that, it says this is the SWC harness. That means steering wheel control harness. So that's just going to plug into this brain. And again, that's why I'm stressing that you should read the directions for the main vehicle system harness first, because we can see right here that it says disregard the harness that comes with the ASWC-1. So if you were reading through all the directions for this first, you might be confused, wondering about all these connections that you need to make, when in reality, you don't even need to use this harness. You're simply just going to plug this into the brain. This harness also has its own brain on a separate 12-pin connector that we can plug in simply enough. But other than that, there's just a few more plug-in style connections like this one right here off the main vehicle harness. This plugs into the head unit in order to actually send it the remote signals for controlling from the steering wheel controls. We also have this connector here. This will give the head unit video signal from the factory backup camera. And then the head unit has a couple of things itself. It has a USB wire. That way we can connect a memory stick somewhere in the vehicle and listen to tunes off of that. And it also has this microphone. That way we can still use the hands-free Bluetooth to talk through our phone. Now, in order to actually connect all of our wires together, there are 2 different options to choose from. We can use the crimp method or we can use the solder method. Both of these are explained in the master sheet. With the crimp method, you want to make sure that you have a really good pair of crimpers to really tighten down on those connectors. I prefer the solder method, and that's what I used on this project, so I wanted to give you a quick explanation of how to do so. First, we will strip about a 1/2 inch of insulation away from the wire. We will then put an inch-long piece of heat shrink tubing over that wire. Once the insulation is stripped from the wire that we are connecting to, we can twist the 2 together and then solder. The last step is to slide the heat shrink tubing over the connection and then use a heat gun to shrink it down. So I've now made the majority of the connections that I need to make here using that soldering technique. I'll definitely bundle this up a little bit better, but I recommend leaving your wiring somewhat accessible for the time being until we test everything out. Got the brains plugged in, now I just need to plug this in to the back of the head unit. So let's take a closer look at the head unit itself. We already saw the instruction manual and some of the included wiring that I pulled out of the box just to make those points that we were talking about, but let's see what else we have in here. Open on up, and you can see that we get a remote control that we can use, some information on the warranty. Here's the head unit itself, along with some mounting screws and a piece of Velcro. We'll take off this protection. Ooh, nice and shiny. One of the main reasons I went with this head unit is it's a lot more simple than many of the double DINs. You can see that it actually only has like a single DIN size here, and what's nice about this is it doesn't have a CD player built in. My friend that this build is for, he doesn't really ever use CDs, he uses more digital content. This can play FLAC files, it can play lossless files, so we can definitely still play really high-end music, but what's nice about this is there's plenty of room inside the dash to hide some of our wiring harness without things getting too cramped. The reviews on this unit also said that it's very fast to respond to the touch, so I'm curious to try that out. If we look on the back side here, you can see that we have 2 different USB connections. It's nice that there are two. This first one here, this is designated as needing to be your connection when you're connecting for Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, whereas this other one here can be used with USB memory stick music. It's nice that you could have both plugged in and you could switch between sources, or you could be using something like navigation on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto while listening to music on the other. It's got our normal RCA outputs that we'll be using for the aftermarket amplifiers. It has a camera input that we'll be using for the reverse camera. This is your typical antenna connection for FM and AM radio. This connection here is for an aftermarket satellite radio connection. This connection here connects to our wiring harness that we made. And then finally, there's the remote connection that's also going to plug in as part of our wiring harness to control this from the steering wheel controls. And then there's a microphone connection that we're using for that microphone for hands-free voice. So again, it might look intimidating off the bat, like there's a million connections, but once you know what they are, it's actually pretty simple. So I've got all these parts set out. I've got everything out of the box. Next, I should move on to mounting this in the fit kit. Assembling the fit kit is usually pretty simple. Just follow the directions, and in this case I have these two side pieces that are going to attach to the main front piece, which makes this an assembly, and then I can attach that full assembly to the head unit using these screws that screw into the sides. It is possible to have some screws left over that came with the fit kit, because in this case this is what would be used if you were doing a single DIN head unit. It would go across here and then you would have the extra room for this pocket. But since I'm not using that, I have these screws left over. And another tip that I want to give you guys is the screws that hold the radio on the sides here. Make sure that you use those screws that actually come with the head unit. The reason for that is these screws that are meant to assemble these different pieces together, they might be too long or might not be the right size, and they could damage the head unit. Make sure you're using these screws that the manufacturer intended you to, so don't get them mixed up. So obviously so far we've been doing a ton of prep work, but we are finally ready to move here into the vehicle, and we're going to take out this head unit. Again, super nice that we have basically a step-by-step process on how to do this. The first thing we're going to do is we want to make sure that we eject the CD if there's one in there. That seems simple enough, but I can't tell you how many times I've forgotten to do that. The next thing we're going to do is we make sure we set the parking brake, and we are going to disconnect the negative battery terminal. Next, we're going to put our hand below the trim panel here, and we're going to pull in order to release these 9 clips. Crutchfield also does a good job of noting things like this. Do not disconnect the airbag wiring harness if there is one. You can see in their example that the passenger airbag warning light was actually down in this panel. It's a little bit different on this exact vehicle. Sometimes it can change from model year to model year, but if there was this harness plugged in down here, we would want to make sure that we do not unplug it. And I'm guessing that's for an important reason. You would probably have to take this to the dealer to have some sort of warning light reset if you were to unplug that. So again, really valuable information here that we can read through on our steps. Next, we need to remove the 4 Torx T20 screws. Now that we have those screws removed, we're going to pull this assembly out and disconnect all the wiring, and then we will continue to follow the master sheet instructions here for applying the new head unit, plugging it in, and securing it in place. I've got the harness plugged in, and we've turned on power for the first time, and good news, we've got power obviously here at the head unit. So now what I'm working on doing is I'm working on setting up the steering wheel control interface. On some head units, you'll immediately have some functionality assigned. In this case, I need to actually program everything. So what I'm going to do here is go to custom. The first thing I want to record is the volume up. So I hold on there, and then I press and hold it. And just that fast, it's programmed itself. So now you can see if I hit the volume up button, the volume up goes up. Now there are 2 final connections that I need to wire into the vehicle here and connect at the head unit. The first of which is this microphone that we mentioned earlier. This microphone will allow us to tell our head unit what to do when we're using Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. And it also allows us to talk on phone calls through the Bluetooth feature. Wiring it is really easy. You're just going to run the wire down the A pillar. You're going to come across somewhere through the dash. You definitely want to make sure that you avoid the steering wheel shaft here. You don't want to impede the movement of that in any way, but we're just going to run the plug up into this location. And another nice little tip is you can use a really long zip tie like this to kind of poke through different areas of the dash. Once you poke it through to the other side, you secure this with tape and then carefully pull it through. And the final connection we need to make is for our USB. This is going to connect to the little pigtails on the back of the head unit here. And we would want to run this to an area that it would be easy to plug in our phone. You could just run it down through the dash into this little storage cubby. That way you just plug in your phone there. I'm going to be doing something a little bit more advanced throughout the build that's going to be in separate videos, but my plan is I want to try to wire it and have a location in either one of these or possibly down in here. I'm not quite sure exactly where yet, but I'm trying to have an integrated plug-in solution. Now that I've done all this testing and I know everything's good to go, I can turn off the vehicle, I can remove the negative battery terminal, and I can unplug everything so that I can tidy up this harness. Now it's just a matter of plugging everything back in and carefully tucking all of that harness into the dash and then securing the new head unit in place and adding the trim bezel. Let's power everything back up, dive in, and take a look at our new upgrade. First thing I noticed right away is this is very responsive to the touch. I mean, it's literally like touching a phone screen. Nothing at all like most factory screens, extremely responsive. I love it. At first I was kind of like, well, this display seems very, very simple, which it is, but if you think about it, it's actually nice and large buttons. That way you're not hunting for a button when you want to do something while driving. If we go through all the different sources here, we of course still have access to our normal AM/FM radio. I can also push my button here that I programmed on the steering wheel to switch sources. I don't have the Sirius XM tuner attached, otherwise it would show something there, but we can go to Bluetooth audio, we can go to our phone since that's connected, we could program in some favorites here, and then we have access to both of our USB ports there. Remember that first USB port is what we want to use with our phone with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and our second one here is what we could use connected to a little memory stick drive that has a bunch of music loaded on it. I think that I'm going to run that wire over inside the glove box here, that way he can plug in a hard drive and just always have it stored away, ready to go. And then of course access to settings, which here we have a bunch of different enhancements we can do on the sound. Looks like they've got a 10-band EQ here that we can go through some of the different settings. The point that I'm trying to make here is there's definitely a ton more functionality here than your traditional stock head unit. Nice, we can even do our own custom curve. For this application, the ability to now play high-quality files is huge, especially with that strong 5-volt pre-outs coming out of the back of the radio that we're going to send to our amps. This is my favorite functionality though. I now have Android Auto connected, and let's take a look at some of these features. And keep in mind, a lot of these features are going to be very similar for Apple CarPlay. One of the first apps we can open here is Maps. The map feature alone is a huge upgrade if your vehicle doesn't have factory navigation. Now you have navigation built in. You of course have access to your phone and other different apps that you might add, but what's really cool is since we have our microphone connected, we can also use the traditional hands-free technology. Depending on your device, you can say the activation keyword. In this case, I'll say, "Okay, Google." And now you can see this little bar pops up at the bottom and it's listening to what I'm saying. So if I were saying something important, it would do what I'm asking it to do. A couple of examples would be you could tell it where you want to navigate, you could tell it what song to play, what playlist to play, and so on. So tons of new functionality. We still retained all of our controls like we were talking about earlier. We still retained the reverse camera. Sorry about the warning chime there. I wish I could give you guys an accurate listening test, but just trust me when I say that upgrading to an aftermarket head unit oftentimes will make the sound quality far, far better. Even with stock speakers, obviously it can get even better from there. But for my application, I've left the speaker wires disconnected because I'm going to be connecting amplifiers in a future video. So we are good to go. Our new head unit is installed. So now you can see with proper planning and getting the right parts and understanding the basics behind upgrading our car stereo, you can still do this upgrade on newer vehicles. And by doing this upgrade, we can get better sound, far more features, and ease of use. Next time you're planning a car audio upgrade, definitely check out show sponsor Crutchfield. You can learn more at the link down in the video description or here on screen to get a special offer for car audio fabrication fans. If you're new here, I'd love to have you as a subscriber because I'm going to be installing a bunch of these other goodies that I got from Crutchfield, along with speakers, amplifiers, and a subwoofer enclosure into this vehicle. As always, my friends, thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to design, build, and install.